Great. So I think the clicker is coming, but let me start off by talking just a little bit about what you saw this morning. This morning we showed the little video, and it was a bit of the qualitative research about millennials that Aimia conducted over. Thank you. That Aimia conducted over the summer. Now I'm going to share the quantitative piece of it with you. So you guys should all have copies of our research report. I thought it might be helpful because you're going to see some of the same charts in my slides that you'll see in this report. So feel free to look at the slides or look at the report, whatever works best for you. And it's kind of interesting that I'm following Michael from Facebook, as you'll see in my next slide. Is there anybody that does not know who these two people are? Interesting. So that's Keisha and Jesse Eisenberg, in case you didn't know. No, actually, we know who they are. And the reason why I've got these two up here is because I think they're really good examples of the profound importance of this generation, particularly over the next 30 years as they start to drive the consumer economy around the world. So Lady Gaga is interesting because we did this survey in 3 markets this summer. We surveyed millennial consumers in the U.S. and in Canada and in the U.K. And in all 3 of the markets that we surveyed, Lady Gaga is and her album Born This Way are on the top of the pop charts in all 3 markets. I went to Australia last week and I delivered this research presentation there. And of course I checked the Australian pop charts before I got up on stage. And of course she was at the top of the pop charts there as well. So it's interesting in that I think in the research data that we'll share kind of shows this. This is probably a more globalized generation than we've experienced before. And when we looked at the research in all 3 of the markets that we surveyed, we asked the same questions in all 3 markets. And the answers that we got back were much more similar in all 3 markets than they were different. There were some cultural differences, minor ones. But for the most part, millennials and Gen Y consumers all over the world, they're all saying the same things about loyalty and rewards, about consumer privacy, about technology, and you heard some of those conversations that we had with them this morning. So I think she's just kind of indicative of the globalization of this generation. In terms of Mr. Zuckerberg, I'm usually a bit, I give a little bit of a ding on Mr. Zuckerberg right now, but because we just heard from Michael, I'm feeling all self-conscious about it, so I'm not going to say anything bad about Mr. Zuckerberg and privacy, but I will point out that I can't imagine outside of perhaps Steve Jobs, who of course recently passed away, anyone who's had more of a profound influence on this generation than Mr. Zuckerberg. And he's built an entire business model, an entire new way of thinking about social data, that's really predicated on the idea of all of us sharing as much information as we can, not only with our social circles, as we do within Facebook, but also with advertisers, with all the folks that Facebook works with who are looking at our information. And I think the business model that Mr. Zuckerberg created is one predicated on the idea that we should all be completely okay with this. We should be happy with sharing information with whomever we want to share it with whomever advertisers want to look at it. So we wanted to ask millennials how they felt about that. You know, we think about millennials being okay with sharing information and the kind of open books. So we wanted to ask a lot of questions about that as well, and you'll see some of those answers. So just an example of 2 folks that I think are representative of how important this generation has become to the global economy. So why did we decide to look at this group of consumers? We've heard a lot of labels attached to Generation Y. So the name Generation Y itself kind of implies that they're just kind of an offshoot of Generation X, right? It doesn't really give them their own identity. We've heard them referred to as echo boomers. We've heard them referred to as the boomerang generation because they go out into the real world after college and they see how hard it is and they move back in with their parents. We've heard a lot of dismissive labels. We like the term millennials because it's really a kind of a neutral descriptor of the importance of this generation as the first one that's grown up in the new millennium. There's about 1.7 billion of them worldwide. I think in India, about half of the working age population is Generation Y. In the U.S., as I mentioned earlier, there's 77 million of them. It's actually a larger cohort than the baby boom. And they already contribute $600 billion to the U.S. economy. Well, what makes that number even more important is that as baby boomers begin to retire, Ben Bernanke gave a speech a couple years ago where he talked about the fact that as boomers start to pull their spending out of the economy, they're going to dramatically slow GDP growth. So think about the economic situation that we're in now. On top of that, baby boomers are going to stop spending the way we're used to having them spend, and it's going to be up to this generation to pick up the slack. That's how important they are. Just culturally, this is their moment. If you think about what's been going on in the news in terms of what's happening in Occupy Wall Street right now, what's happened over the summer in the UK with the riots that went on there, what happened with the Arab Spring, this is the generation that elected Barack Obama. So they're profoundly important, and this is their moment. This is their time now. I'm Gen X, so my time happened sometime in the 90s, and it had something to do with Kurt Cobain and a couple of movies starring Ethan Hawke, right? My time is over, but this is their time, so we thought it was important to look at them. So we conducted a survey, like I said, 3 markets, Canada, UK, and the US. We worked with an online research firm called Harris Interactive. And we surveyed about 2,000 consumers in each market, about evenly distributed between millennial consumers, which we defined as 19 to 29, and older consumers. And we asked them a lot of questions related to reward programs, loyalty, technology, etc. And this is the information that they gave back to us. And there's more detailed information about the survey and the questions that we ask in the paper. So in terms of respondent details, I'm not sure what's going on with that slide, but you guys can take a look at it in the paper itself. So in terms of respondent details, it's about evenly distributed between what we would call older millennials, 25 to 29, and these are the folks that might actually remember what a compact disc looks like and know how to put it into a compact disc player, and younger millennials, whom we might think of as digital natives, and these are the folks that don't even know what a compact disc is anymore. And if you're old enough to remember what a vinyl record is, you have my sympathies, because we've kind of moved on from there. They're on track to be the most educated generation in history. So if you think about not only in terms of college graduates who are graduating and finding a rather tough employment climate, what you often see is they continue on with their education. So they're on track to be the most educated generation in U.S. history. They represent more potential spend in terms of the U.S. economy than actual spend, but again, as we mentioned, the spending power is growing. The biggest watch out for this generation is, of course, the employment situation, and as you'll see in the paper, about 17% of the millennials that we surveyed said that they were unemployed and looking for work, as opposed to about 10% of older consumers. So about 17%, that's a pretty high number. Extrapolate that out to 77 million millennials, and you see a generation that's quite concerned about their immediate employment prospects. Although it was interesting, Bruce this morning talked about the sense of optimism in the U.S. versus the rest of the world, and we seem to be slightly depressed, and the data was kind of making me a little depressed, but there's a big millennial research study that came out last year by Pew that we reference in the paper, and they found when they surveyed this generation that there's actually a really high-level sense of optimism in spite of the economy and in spite of their current situation employment-wise. They're actually pretty optimistic that things are going to turn out okay for them, and that while they're concerned about their immediate level of spending and they're concerned about saving, and they feel like they need to save more and pay closer attention to what they buy, and they're looking for value in every interaction with brands with which they do business. Overall, they tend to think that they're going to be okay, which is something that I think we'll need to think about as we market to these folks. So all the questions that we asked them had to do with what we call relationship cornerstones, and we talk about this a lot at Aimia in terms of what it is that actually builds a customer relationship and what elements make up a customer relationship. So we know that customer relationships are never static. They're always either declining or increasing in value. So the perceived value of the relationship is quite important for both sides. The consumer needs to see increasing levels of value in the relationship, whether that's through your core products and services or whether it's through recognition and reward. They want to perceive that the value is growing. And then the value's got to grow for the brand as well. It's got to grow for you as a marketer. So that you perceive that you're getting more value out of the client, so you understand that what you're doing is actually making a difference. Trust is supremely important. You think about any relationship in your personal life, whether it's a new friend or your oldest friend, it always started out, the relationship always starts out with small talk, right? You talk about the weather, you talk about sports, and eventually you find some common ground, and you become acquaintances, and then you become friends, and then you start to talk about more personal details and intimate things, and that increases the level of trust, and you feel more willing to share more with that friend, right? So it's the same with a brand relationship. If the value increases, the level of trust increases, and the level of trust increases the flow of information, which you can then look at, and by information, of course, we mean customer data. You can look at that customer data, you find insight in it, and you deliver that insight back to the customer in the form of additional value, and that creates kind of a virtuous circle or a positive feedback loop, and that increases the value of the relationship. So this is the fundamental way that you build a customer relationship. So the questions that we ask were kind of designed to draw out what millennials think about these cornerstones. So in terms of, oops, that went backwards. So in terms of value, we asked kind of an open-ended question, what factors make you loyal to a brand? And we gave our respondents just a text box so they could type in whatever we want. We didn't suggest any answers to them. And these are the responses that they gave back to us after we coded them. And what you can see is the things that make consumers loyal to a brand are essentially the same things that Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, talked about 60 years ago. He said that the drivers of customer loyalty were quality, products and services, a good customer service, a good, friendly, clean environment, and good value in your pricing. These are the things that make a customer loyal to you. And the answers that we got back from both millennials and older consumers say that that's exactly how they feel. They're motivated by quality products, they're motivated by customer service, they're motivated by fair pricing. There's really no difference between how millennials view brand loyalty than older consumers, with one exception, as you can see in this chart. Millennials right now are more focused on price than older consumers. And I mentioned the 17% unemployment. What that means is that millennials are looking for value in every interaction. It's important to them because they're watching their spending very closely. They're concerned about the current economic situation. So price is a little bit more important to them. What was interesting, and this is actually a little bit different than what we saw in the UK and in Canada, is that in terms of recommendations, that little red box there in the millennial responses represents the numbers that told us that they look to recommendations from their social networks as factors affecting their brand loyalty. So you see, it's not a whole lot of people. So again, if you think about a recommendation and what it means, recommendation can mean a lot in terms of encouraging trial. It can mean a lot in terms of expanding your consumer base in the form of acquisition. But in terms of building loyalty, it doesn't necessarily have that profound an effect. Where it does have a profound effect is in purchase decisions, and we'll see that information a little bit later. But what happens if you are in kind of a situation of parity with your competition, and you're offering roughly the same level of quality at roughly the same level of customer service at roughly the same level of prices? So you guys have reached a level of parity with your competitor. What can you do at that point to be differentiating? What can you do at that point to try to capture share of customer or build additional brand loyalty or value in the relationship? Well, the way you do that is by putting some additional value on the table. And that additional value typically comes in the form of recognition and reward. And oftentimes that recognition and reward is delivered through the framework of a customer loyalty or reward program. That's why we do these things. So we ask another very simple question is, if everything is equal and you've got a choice between brand A and brand B, and they're both offering roughly the same levels of stuff at roughly the same prices, how likely is a loyalty program to make you choose one brand over another? And as you can see from our answers, if you combine very and somewhat likely, over 3/4 of millennials say that a loyalty and reward program would make a difference in them choosing brand A over brand B. And the reason why this is, I think, is because they've grown up in a world where the loyalty market is quite saturated, particularly in the U.S. You know, the loyalty and reward programs have been around in their modern form for 30 years. So they've grown up seeing their parents participate in these programs. They've grown up seeing their older siblings participate in these programs. They understand what they're supposed to do. And they are quite willing to participate. They're willing to play the game. They get it. So they're willing to make that a deciding factor in choosing one brand over another if everything else is equal. In terms of trust, we understand that, again, trust is very important in the relationship. That's going to help increase the flow of information, which in turn increases the value. So we ask in another open-ended question, what value you would need in order to share personal information with marketers. Because you need to feel that the relationship is trustworthy in order to do that. So again, in unprompted responses, you can see the things that consumers told us that would make them most likely to deliver additional information to you as a marketer. The number one thing was they feel like they should be rewarded for it. Over and above your basic products and services, they feel like they should get a little something back for sharing information with you. So that was number one. And you can see that millennials are more likely to think that this is something that they should get. And again, it's because they understand the game. They know that this information is important to you. They're willing to share it with you, but they need to feel like they're getting something back for it. Consumers want to understand that the information that they give you is going to be secure, that it's not going to be stolen by anybody, and they want to understand that you're going to use the information ethically, that you're not going to give it to anybody else without their permission, right? So these are the basic things that make a consumer feel like they're in a trusting relationship with you. And the one difference between millennials and older consumers is millennials are even more interested in getting something back for it. So in terms of the sharing of information, so again, we know if we're in this customer relationship and we're delivering recognition and rewards and consumers are responding and participating, that it's going to increase the flow of information back. We know that consumers will typically do more business with you if they're involved in this type of activity. We know that they're likely to feel or be more loyal or act more loyal to you if they're engaged in this type of relationship. We know that they're more likely to tell friends about positive reward experiences. We know that they're likely to do some unsolicited word-of-mouth marketing for you. And you can see that in these responses, there's no real difference between the way that millennials and older consumers feel when they're engaged with you in these types of activities, with one exception. Millennials are much more likely to be interested in promoting or willing to promote your products and brands through social media in exchange for rewards. So we talked about the social graph just a little while ago, all the sharing that happens within Facebook. Millennials are far more likely to be willing to engage in this type of activity, knowingly understanding that it's valuable to you. They're much more likely to do so. So that's one important difference in how the information flows from millennials to marketers and the way it flows from older consumers to marketers. But there's one key challenge that we all have to face, and we all know what this is, and it's the technology piece, right? So we know that because the millennial generation has smartphones glued to their hands, that they're able to access a lot more information typically than older consumers do. So we ask questions around this. We ask millennials and older consumers, do you ever use your mobile device? And this is just the universe of smartphone owners. Do you ever use your mobile device to make price comparisons in the store? Do you ever use it to check user reviews before you make a purchase? Do you ever use it to actually go out and check your Facebook friends or go onto Twitter to seek opinions before you make a purchase? And you can see that overall, millennials are far more likely to engage in this type of activity in the store than older consumers. And this is just folks that own smartphones, right? So this is an important difference. So what it means to us is that price is now transparent. You used to be able to do things with pricing to make it look like you had the lowest prices when maybe you really didn't. You can't do that anymore because within 30 seconds, a millennial consumer can figure out that you actually don't have the lowest prices and they can leave. Quality used to be an individual judgment, right? You used to decide on your own whether the brand was offering quality products and services. Well, now quality is something that's determined by consensus. We decide collectively what quality means. And we do that through Facebook, we do it through Yelp, we do it through Twitter, but this is information that's outside of your control as a marketer. And although the numbers are lower, millennials are about twice as likely to seek opinion from their social networks. Should I buy this? Hey, here's a picture of these shoes. I think I'm going to buy them. What do you think? Right? They'll get that information before they make a purchase. So this is the big challenge marketing to this generation. They are able to quickly access large quantities of information that are completely outside of your control. So what that means to us is that now more than ever, we need to understand these folks at the level of the individual customer. So we can understand what's important to them, what's going to motivate them, which of those loyalty drivers that we talked about are most important to them, and use that information to pierce through all of this extraneous stuff that we don't have any control over. So then we moved into a lot of technology questions, and we were interested in understanding mind share around mobile applications. So again, this is self-reported data, so it doesn't really give you hard numbers of how many of these consumers are actually responding to location-based offers, or how many of them have received them but not responded. What I think it represents is mind share. When we ask these questions, do you use branded apps? Are you making purchases within applications? Are you using reward program apps? Are you responding to daily deals? Are you responding to location-based offers, etc.? This represents, I think, the mind share of this activity amongst this generation versus older consumers. And you can see that it was a bit surprising that the numbers are actually a little bit low. We hear all this information about location-based offers and how they're the coming thing and everybody responds to them, but only about 1 in 10 millennials really say that they've paid any attention to a location-based offer. Only about a third say that they've responded or paid attention to a daily deal. The numbers in branded apps are pretty good. More consumers are making in-app purchases. But even though these numbers are pretty low, you can see that millennials are actually, particularly in responding to location-based or using reward programs or making in-app purchases, are still a little bit more likely to do these things. So, but overall the numbers are pretty low, and I think what this shows is that as we think about launching all these mobile applications, and doing location-based offers and getting involved in daily deals, it's not that these things can't be quite valuable, it's not that they can't work, but we need to really think about what type of value that we're delivering through this activity. And not just do it because we think it's the coming thing or because millennials expect us to do it. Let's really figure out what it is that they expect to get from this activity, and I think we'll see this mind share start to increase. But right now, marketers have some work to do to convince the millennial generation that there's some value to be found in these activities. Then we moved on to questions around privacy. So we talked about Facebook and their relationship with privacy. What we did find, and it's even more pronounced here in the U.S. than it is in some of the other markets that we looked at, millennials are actually much more likely to enter into a relationship with you with a default expectation of trust, right? So they're willing to step up and provide personal information and register with your website, much more likely to do so than older consumers. They're willing to provide personal information and join a reward program because they know that they're supposed to get some value out of it, and they're much more likely to do that than older consumers. So they'll enter into the relationship with a default expectation of trust. I think that's the one thing that growing up in this world that we live in has done for them, because they've seen value in these types of relationships. They're willing to go in and give you a shot. Where they do feel very similar to older consumers is in the expectation of opt-in and trust. So when you ask questions like, is it important for you to know what data marketers are collecting on me? Is it important for you to be able to opt in before your smartphone starts to track your location? Is it important for you to opt in before the websites that you're visiting start to track your activity? Would you like to create some kind of a personal privacy profile that you can carry with you online and it's got a big padlock on it and marketers can't access it unless you give them permission? When you look at all these answers, there's no difference between how millennials feel about opt-in versus older consumers. They're just as concerned with knowing what you're doing. So they'll enter into the relationship trusting, yeah, I'll give you whatever information you want to know because I want to do business with you. But they're going to have very high expectations, just as high as older consumers, that they're going to know exactly what it is that you're doing. So I think that's an important privacy distinction that we don't always make with this generation. Yes, they're more open, but no, they're not just willing to let you do whatever you want without telling them about it. So going into reward program information, we ask a lot of questions around reward and loyalty, and this is just kind of a taste of it. There's a lot more information in the paper, and that we'll continue to release. So just in terms of memberships, you can see that overall millennial consumers are about just as likely to be members of at least one reward program than older consumers. Older consumers are a little bit more heavily represented, mostly in the legacy sectors of travel and credit card. One thing that is interesting is an interesting difference is in terms of speed to reward and the expectation of instant gratification. I think we even heard one of our interviewees this morning talk about the fact that they're the instant gratification generation, right? And when we ask how long you think that it should take to earn a reward, millennials were much more interested in being rewarded quickly. Usually within the first 30 days, or if not 30 days, at least within the first 3 months. They need to see some expectation of value come back in the program relatively quickly, probably much more quickly than the older generation. And I think part of that is driven by the sectors that they play in. So when we looked at age penetration in the various loyalty program sectors, of course, older consumers are more heavily represented in travel and in credit card and financial services, and there's this legacy expectation of being able to save up points or miles and exchange them for a big ticket reward. Millennial consumers aren't playing in these programs quite as much, so their expectations of being rewarded more quickly are quite higher. And what will be interesting to see is if over time, as millennials age and get more heavily involved in business travel and in credit card spend, if they will modify their expectations and start to save up for big ticket items, or if they will continue to feel this way and feel that they're going to need to be rewarded more quickly than perhaps their older consumers felt that they needed to be. In terms of why they'd want to join a reward program, again, very, very pragmatic expectations of value. So give me a program that's free to join. Give me a program that's easy to join and participate in. Give me a program that I can earn rewards quickly in. And you don't see a lot of difference between millennial consumers and older consumers. These are pretty much the reasons why folks would be interested in joining a program. So you'll continue to see free, simple, easy be the watchwords for how we try to deliver these value propositions to consumers. And again, relevant to the coalition talk that we listened to earlier this morning, it's interesting in that, again, there's no real dominant example of a multi-partner loyalty coalition in the U.S. Many have tried and failed to make this happen. And even though there's no concrete example to which you can point, what we did was rank a whole bunch of potential loyalty program benefits, whether it was, personalized rewards or soft benefits or experiential type rewards or the ability to earn a single currency from multiple partners. We asked them to rank these various types of reward program benefits in terms of their appeal. And you can see that for both millennials and older consumers, there's really quite a bit of interest in this concept, even though they don't really have an example to which they can point the way consumers do in Canada and the UK. There is quite a bit of interest in a multi-merchant type of coalition program where folks can earn currency across a wide range of partners. So it'll be interesting to see if somebody's able at some point to be able to get the right elements into play to make this happen and see how quickly consumers will respond to it. So in conclusion, millennials are the next customer loyalty challenge. They do expect instant gratification, but again, it's worth the purpose. I think the danger that we face as marketers, especially when we look at this type of information, is that we are going to just make some basic assumptions about folks as a generation, that they want instant gratification, and we're just kind of going to deliver it across the board to everybody. But in order to meet their expectations of value, it's going to be important for us to use our marketing dollars very efficiently. And what that means is not delivering everything to everybody across your customer base. It's really drilling down in the ways that we talked about in the last panel discussion and trying to understand what motivates these consumers and what that means in terms of their value, and delivering the instant gratification to the consumers with whom you have the most potential to grow the relationship. Whether that's to grow current value or maintain current value or to grow potential value. You want to make sure that you're targeting that feeling of instant gratification where it can do the most good. Because of those expectations of value, it's going to mean a lot for us in terms of maximizing our marketing dollars within the context of these programs. So it's going to mean partner optimization. It's going to be working with your partners to make sure that you're using them most effectively. It's going to be rewards management. It's going to be making sure that you're really leveraging your rewards efficiently and getting the right rewards to the right consumer. It's going to be making sure that you get the most bang for the buck out of your communications channels. So all the things that we talked about in the panel discussion previously, these are all going to continue to be supremely important so that these consumers feel like you're meeting their expectations of value. And because of the current economic climate, the employment situation, again, for some of us, it's going to mean that these millennial consumers represent more potential spend over the next few years than actual spend. So we're going to need to start to modify our definitions of consumer value. It's not going to all be about recency, frequency, and monetary value and the things that we typically think about when we think about customer value. We're going to have to start to think about potential. We're going to have to start thinking about potential to be influencers, folks that are active within social media, and really try to understand how customers are interacting with us and how they're using that relationship and delivering it through all the other channels that are available to them. And start to think about how we can market to those folks that represent value in these ways. And finally, remember that, again, just because millennials have smartphones glued to their hand doesn't mean that smartphones are dumb marketing terminals that are just waiting to receive your marketing messages. They don't think of their phones as marketing vehicles. They think of them as tools to enrich their personal lives. They don't think of Facebook as a marketing vehicle. They think of it as something that allows them to connect with their friends. So they're willing to give you a shot in this type of activity, but you're going to have to demonstrate the value to them very quickly and try to understand what behavior it is that you're actually trying to change. Understand what consumers you're actually trying to reach, what behavior you're actually trying to change, and the proper technology, whether it's a mobile application or an application through Facebook or some other type of that technological solution like mobile wallet, any of those types of things that we've heard are coming for a while. Millennials aren't just going to rush to them. They're going to expect to see value. They're going to expect to understand exactly what it is that you're trying to deliver. And if they see the value inherent in the solution, then they'll respond to it. So there's a lot more information in the white paper. I'd be happy to answer any questions now. I know we're due for a break. And also look for us to release some additional information both in the U.S. Part of the survey, and we'll also be releasing information about the UK and the Canadian versions of this research as well. So thanks for your time. I'll answer any question or two now if you have any. If not, I'll let you guys get to your break. Yes, sir, Mr. Slavic.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Self-reported information, two-way dialogue, survey methodology, preference center. So those types of applications, when combined with analytics, can give you a better idea of the staff's solution. And when you talk about privacy and security, that sort of came up there where it's like, don't take these for granted and let me give you that kind of input, and then it's going to be a more effective communication. Do you think that's a trend and a good application or a good practice or thought?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, particularly from what we've seen from this generation, both in the quantitative data and the qualitative stuff that we did, there's a clear, I think it's more transparent than it's ever been what the game is. I think this generation is very attuned to what the game is, and they understand that this information is valuable to you, and they're more than willing to give it to you, but they do have to see some value come back. So I think all the things that you talked about are going to continue to be important. And I think complete transparency is going to continue to be important. And it's just as simple as telling them exactly what data you're going to collect and using the data that you collect and letting them close that loop so they can see that value coming back to them and they don't start to wonder who's seeing it and what's happening to it. Because I think that's where it breaks down. And we've seen, front page Wall Street Journal investigative series about, this type of relationship between data and privacy. And if we do our job as marketers, I don't think it becomes an issue, and I think it even becomes a benefit for building relationships with this generation.
I think we all have a responsibility that if we're going to ask serious questions, that we better have a proper plan to turn that data around very quickly towards, as the last group said, some personalization and relevancy, and not be too pushy, but and also try to. If you just collect it and don't do anything with it, that's a big no-no. It's just going to turn those customers off from the next
Yeah, and I mean, we've already seen that happen, right? If you remember back about 10 years ago or so, there were all these anti-grocery card groups that started to come up and say, start to wonder what it is that grocers were doing with their data and why they were collecting it, and it was Big Brother. And it's because nobody could figure out what they were doing with it. They had to carry the card to get pork loin at $1.99 a pound instead of $3.99 a pound, so they carried the card, and then I knew the grocers were collecting all this data, and they never saw any value come back. And that raises all the suspicions, causes all the problems, and if we do exactly what you just said, then I think the problem goes away. It becomes a non-issue because they see the value and they understand exactly what's happening. Yes, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Rick, easy one for you, I hope. With the desire for the instant gratification and millennials wanting to get rewards within a month and the influence of Groupon, all that sort of thing, do you think, generally speaking, over the next 10 years, we'll see a trending away from points-based or currency-based rewards programs and more towards discounts, coupons, recognition, status, things of that nature?
I think there's a lot of times a trend towards that, Bill, and I think a lot of it's because of the saturated nature of the market. We all think that the points per dollar concept is tired and consumers don't really care about it. But the reason why I think we keep going back to it, and I think of it more as a universal truth than something that is generationally related, is that the points-based type of currency program, there's so much utility and there's so much elasticity in that model, and you can do so much with it, and it provides much more of a visible reminder of the equity in the relationship for both sides. So the consumer, if they're earning a lot of points and they've got a lot of points in the account, can see, in a quantitative fashion, the value of the relationship. The marketer can see the value of the relationship. It kind of makes the equity in the relationship transparent to both sides. And then in terms of using it as a tool to motivate consumers, whether it's through bonus points and all that type of activity, so you can really pinpoint and target for one type of particular behavior change, it's still the best tool that you have available. And that's why I think it will continue to be a factor. It's certainly not to say that it's always going to be the best solution. Certainly fast, free, and easy, and just give me a 10% off, and just give me, a quick voucher. That's going to continue to be the best solution in a wide variety of situations. And I think your brand promise and the type of behavior that you're trying to change will lead you down the proper solution. So I think there's always a tendency for marketers to start to shy away because it's been around for such a long time. But the reason why it's been around for such a long time is it works so well. So as long as that's the case, I think we'll always see some type of equity-type currency solution in the mix.